Hey everyone, Phobos here, coming at you with another video, and this time it's going to be another discussion video. This will be the second discussion video on the channel, and today we're going to be talking about hybrid. And why talk about hybrid? Well, in the previous video I made about life versus CI, somebody in the comments, they had suggested I give my thoughts on hybrid and how viable I think it is. And I really think it's a great topic, mostly because it's not a topic that gets talked about a lot. And I find it much more interesting actually than the life versus CI debate because in that case we pretty much already know that CI is superior. As I mentioned in the last video, the video itself wasn't really made to cement that fact. It was more made to argue against counter arguments that people are making to that point of CI being better, right? So a ton of people came out from the community and said CI was better. And then when on Reddit and stuff like that, counter arguments get made as to why life isn't really that bad, and that video is mostly responding to those people. So the actual life versus CI debate, as far as I'm concerned, is pretty much over. Which brings us to hybrid, right? And I've actually made quite a few hybrid characters. This one I have here is my Glacial Cascader that I made, I think, in Parandus League. And you can see it has like around 6k life and about 3.3k energy shield. So it's fairly decent makes fairly decent use of both defenses. And I'm not really going to talk about the character too much specifically, but just the general concept of hybrid. So where do we start, right? Well, the first thing that I wanted to point out is that I don't consider Mind Over Matter plus Eldritch Battery builds hybrid. So I'm not going to be, nothing I say in this video is really going to refer to them. Now, both of those builds, I mean, those types of builds do use Energy Shield and Life, but the way they use it makes them unique from a classical hybrid build that has the Energy Shield over the Life. Um, so yeah, technically they're still using both resources, and you can call them hybrid if you want. I'm not really trying to make a like police how we talk about that. I guess it's just for the purposes of this video. I don't really consider that a hybrid build because the mechanics on those builds function in completely different ways, right? So a Mind Over Matter plus Eldritch Battery build functions essentially as a life build that's using Mind Over Matter. It's just that instead of having Mind Over Matter, you have or instead of having mana for Mind Over Matter, you have Energy Shield. So it doesn't really affect the build in too many ways significantly. And Hybrid has some unique challenges that a Mind Over Matter Eldritch Battery build does not face. So I'm going to be strictly talking about builds that have their ES over their life. So just to start things off, like generally speaking, I'm not really a fan of hybrid builds, having played them a lot, unless they are on a totem character or a summoner. And you're going to see the reasons for this unfold a little bit more, but the long and the short of it, just to give it to you right away, is that because summoners and totem characters aren't in direct combat, they can make use of the total effective health of the life combined with the ES without really needing like a really quick regen mechanic for either or, right? So just a little bit of health regen will set you up on those builds because your health will be regenning and you're kind of like running around not getting hit, and your energy shield regens automatically after a certain amount of time. So as long as you can stay mobile and stay not being damaged, your resources will come back. And you can also use health flasks, obviously, if you want to speed up your health regeneration. So because those builds aren't direct combat-centric builds, where they're in the fray taking a lot of damage, a lot of the things I'm going to be saying in this video don't really apply to them in terms of like the disadvantages that I'm going to be listing off in this video. So if you have a totem build or a hybrid build, I mean, if you have a totem build or a summoner build, feel free to go hybrid. As you probably noticed, a lot of my totem builds on this channel are hybrid because I feel like if you're not going to build them CI, which in some cases CI is the optimal way to build, I'd say most totem builds. But if you're using something like the Soul Mantle that I use in a lot of my builds, because I've been just wanting to mess around with that lately, you know, you don't have a big ES chest, so you may not want to go all CI, especially with the recent Incinerate Totem build. I had so many unique pieces of gear I was trying to work in there that going CI wouldn't really be viable. So in that case, you're pretty much going life, and if you're going life, you might as well use you might as well put the energy shield that you can get to some use, right? And hence why you would go hybrid, and the same thing on a summoner. But moving past that, let's get into the advantages first. I'll talk about the advantages, and then I'll talk about the disadvantages. So the advantages to going hybrid, the first most obvious one I would say is a higher effective HP, right? So you can just get more life in ES than one alone, right? Especially because you can get ES in life on the gear relatively easily, like especially if you use ES pieces of gear. And something that's going to allow you to get the ES super easily is that you can just use straight up energy shield gear, because life or evasion and armor generally aren't really good stats unless you're stacking them. You can make an argument that evasion is pretty decent in small amounts, but I'd say armor is almost like completely useless in small amounts. So it's actually a little bit ironic. This is a hybrid helm that I have shown off here, but it has a decent chunk of energy shield. Anyways, yeah, armor is not very good in small amounts. So in a lot of cases, when you're just trying to fill in your slots with random rares, right? It's very easy to get energy shield on those, because if you have a pair of sorcerer's gloves, they have a default 60 energy shield, which is a fairly decent chunk. So you throw some life on there, you have like 70 to 80, 70 life or whatever. And then if you get an ES roll on top of that, now if you get a decent one, the gloves are up past 100 ES, right? And it's the same thing with boots and the same thing with helms. Like you can easily get a helm that's like 220 ES and 90 life or something like that, and it's not super expensive, with some decent res on there as well. So it's just very easy to get the ES on the gear in conjunction with the life, uh, which makes getting the higher effective health totals very easy. Now, the next point I want to talk about in the advantages kind of piggybacks off this a little bit, and that is the efficiency of the nodes in the tree, and then the skill tree pathing, right? And let's open this tree here. So as you can see, there's like a decent amount of nodes, like these melding clusters and then written in blood are really great for hybrid builds, right? Because they have life and ES essentially within the same node. So you're kind of like double dipping in terms of health. And then even in terms of pathing on the tree, like you'll come over here to Deep Wisdom and you can go up to Heart and Soul, and then it's 3 points to Arcane Focus, which is a really good ES node. There's stuff like Sanctuary that's off to the side. You notice this build right here doesn't even get a lot of ES, right? But it pretty much it's a life build, and then you just pick up the ES where you can, and you still end up with like 3.3k ES, and that's also because you have things like Discipline. So it's just very easy to get your effective health high by taking these combination nodes from the tree and then spending like small amounts into the really good energy shield nodes. Other options is you can come down here. These are really good nodes. It's like 10. This one's only 6, but 10, 6, 10, and then 12. So stuff like that is really, really helpful when you're trying to put together a hybrid build for sure. And the pathing is not anything out of the ordinary or something you wouldn't really see. And the last thing I want to talk about is the efficiency, with the sense of you can just stack ES and life on pieces very easily. You're not going to get the top ES roll, but you'll have either the base ES roll plus a roll and then a life roll, or just the base ES roll. Either one works fine. And I'd say that's pretty much the advantages that you have for going hybrid, right? It's mostly the ease of doing it and the fact that not only is it easy to get the rolls, but they do result in a decent amount of net HP, right? Because this build has about like 9.2k HP when you combine everything together. So that's a fairly good chunk of energy, effective HP that you wouldn't really just be able to get on a life build alone. So, well, let's talk about some of the disadvantages though. And again, these aren't going to apply really so much to summoner and totem builds. So the first main disadvantage, and the reason why I'm not really a fan of these builds, is that if the build is going to be constantly taking damage, then you need some type of reliable ES regeneration or ES refill mechanic, right? Because if you just keep taking damage, then your ES is never going to come back up, right? And then you're essentially losing a huge part of your effective life, right? If I'm running through a map and I'm getting chunked out and the ES goes to like 200 or something, and then I keep getting, even if it's just a small hit that's barely doing any damage at all, it's preventing the recharge, and it's making it very difficult for me to get my ES to come back to full. Now, there are ways you can circumnavigate that because there are things like faster uh, ES recharge, and then there's faster start of energy shield recharge. But in order to make a build like that work, it would require significant investment because, first of all, you need to make the rate at which the energy shield recharges high, right? And then as well, you need to make it so the energy shield start is quicker as well. And there's only like some items that really boost those two attributes, and then there's some stuff in the tree, and you have to make sure you get those nodes. So there's just a lot of restrictions on doing builds like that. So obviously, when you're going to be in the thick of combat, one of the better options, since you don't want to deal with any of that, is Leech, right? Leech is always a good way to get your effective health sustained, basically, right? Now, the problem with Leech in the case of a hybrid build is that you have to take Ghost Reaver and get and basically leech to your energy shield, right? Because if you leech to your life, then you're going to have that problem of your energy shield just staying down constantly. And theoretically, not much is supposed to get through your energy shield except chaos damage, which means that you only really need to leech to your ES in theory anyways, right? So you're thinking, oh, that's no problem. I'll just come up here and get Ghost Reaver. Ghost Reaver is actually not in a super bad position for, I'd say, most builds that want to go hybrid, because it's near the two hybrid clusters, and you get nullification over here as well and stuff like that. So if you're already thinking about going hybrid, you're probably going to be around Ghost Reaver, and it's definitely the node you want to take, but it comes with it a whole set of challenges, right? So the thing about Leech in this game is that if you want to survive the toughest content and really like put your build in very difficult, scary scenarios and have it be able to weather the storm, so to speak, you really want to be looking at things like instant leech, right? Especially versus stuff like reflect as well. And instant leech requires Volpact. Now Volpact is also in a pretty good spot in the tree for us to pick up because it's not super far away from Ghost Reaver or some of these melding clusters, the double dipping effective health clusters, right? So it's not actually taking the node that's the problem, or getting to it rather, but the side effect, which is that life regeneration has no effect. So when you take Volpact, you lose all your life regeneration. This makes you pretty vulnerable to damage over time, poison, and particularly chaos damage, right? Because you have nothing to refill your life. It gets like really annoying when you're doing something like desecrated ground maps, but it gets really annoying when doing very dangerous chaos content. Now, up until recently, I'd say with the advent of Breach League, that's when chaos became even more relevant as a damage type, right? Because this character was built in Parandus League, and things did get sort of sketchy sometimes when I was running with it, because obviously this character has no way, it doesn't have a ton of chaos resist, as you can see. We've got 0%, right? So I think that constitutes basically picking up some of the chaos. Yeah, actually no. So this is, yeah, I have like no chaos res at all, unless I have my Series Promise Flask up. So yeah, pretty much no defense against chaos damage, and then on top of that, no regen mechanic on the health except for the life flask, right? And in Parandus League, things would still get a little sketchy, but it normally wouldn't be too much of an issue because, especially if you pick the maps you want to run and things like that, you don't really have to encounter chaos damage a ton. And when you do, you can kind of pot through it and you can be anticipating it. And this build was kind of like a freezing build, so there was that extra layer of defense. So I made it to this character. I made it to 94 easy with this character, and I could have gone higher with that. I didn't really like the way Glacial was playing at the time. Might have to experiment with it in the future more. But it wasn't as big of a problem back then. But now with the Chaos Breaches, if you take a character into a Chayula Breach that's hybrid, you are in for a world of hurt if you don't have some serious chaos res. I think it was last league, I was doing the Incinerate self-cast build, and that build was hybrid at the time because I didn't want to spend the currency to make a Go CI actually. And I built that on softcore, so I didn't have any currency, so I couldn't afford a presence of Chula because all my currency was in the hardcore league. I made the character in the softcore league to play with a friend, and presence of Chula is really nice for the hybrid builds because it gives so much chaos res. But since I didn't have it, I had virtually no chaos res, and it was hybrid. So whenever I hit a Chula breach, I would just get absolutely destroyed, and that's no fun because you want to be able to do Chula in these leagues because Chiula is a great source of wealth, essentially, right? The splinters sell for the most, and there's good items that can drop. So it's mostly for the splinters and stuff, but yeah, so you want to be able to crush that type of content, and you just really can't do that reliably with one of these builds without having your hair trigger on your flask, right? You can just get hit so hard, especially when you have the breach in a high level map, in red maps, with very difficult affixes on the map. You can just get crushed, and your 6k life, you basically get reduced down to 6k life pretty easily because so much of the damage coming through is chaos, so you really don't have your full effective 9k life. Um, so there's that, and then so the second one I have here is that in a build that relies on leeching, you need a sizable ES component so that you're not constantly dipping into your life. So this is, even if we're not talking about the chaos res, right, or the chaos problem, you still, if you're going to go hybrid and you're going to be in the fray and you're going to be leeching your ES, you want a decent pool of ES, right? And part of the problem is that you basically get into the situation where you use some pieces of gear where you want to make use of all the stats, right? This Carcass Jack was a perfect example at the time. It gives energy shield. I don't want to waste 200 energy shield on my character, right? But if for some reason I wasn't able to use discipline and build or path through the tree the way I did in this character, or use um, other items that gave me energy shield, then I wouldn't really have much extra energy shield. And that would be kind of a big problem because if this was only like 1k energy shield or 1.5k energy shield and I'm getting hit by anything substantial, I'm constantly dipping into my life and I'm not regenning life at all, right? Because I have Ghost Reaver, so all my leech is going to my ES. So I'm basically just constantly flask managing, and yeah, it wouldn't be like the absolute worst thing, right? But it would just get annoying, and it doesn't feel fluid when you play it because you're typically only thinking of using your life flask in an emergency situation, and you're getting brought into these emergency situations so much more often because damage is constantly going through your ES or not going through it, but taking it out and then dipping into your life. So these types of builds that rely on Leech and Hybrid, you really need to have like a decent pool of ES. Like I'd say like at least 2k, probably like 2.5k or something ES. And that's not really possible to do with every build. So in some cases you get like 1 to 1.5k ES and you just feel like, oh, all this is useless and I don't really feel like taking Ghost Reaver. And it just doesn't, if you don't take Ghost Reaver, then you're not leeching to your ES, so it just gets chunked down uh, throughout the duration of the map, and it basically disappears as effective health, right? It's not useful for you anymore. So that's another problem you can run into with Hybrid. And then the last thing I have here is that you can't use Blood Magic with it unless you're going to be leeching to your ES, right? This is not as big of a problem because a lot of times you are going to be leeching to your ES as well anyways, but there's some situations, like I have a build with Shockwave Totem I'm going to be trying in the future where I use the Covenant, I think, and typically I would just like to build my Totem build hybrid because if you do hybrid, then you can use life, ES, and mana as defense mechanics, right? Whereas if I do the mind over matter plus EB route, then I'm basically, the whole point there is to give up my mana and then use the energy shield as the mana for mind over matter. So you're gaining essentially maybe more out of your mana bar in terms of auras and stuff, but in terms of defenses, you're losing out on maybe an extra like 1k or so effective health, 1 to 1.5k effective health. Not to mention that can also help with chaos res as well. So I don't typically like to do that when I can avoid it. But in the case if you're using a chest like the Covenant or something, you really have no choice in putting your ES over your mana, because if you don't, then your ES will never regen unless you're leeching with the Covenant, but this would be a totem build with it. So every time you cast a totem, you're taking out of you're doing damage to yourself, which is preventing your ES recharge. So you can't really do that hybrid totem build that you'd normally be able to do otherwise. So that's a big problem with when you're trying to run blood magic with this type of stuff. And yeah, I'd say that's pretty much it. I don't really think there's much else. If I think of anything else, I'll make an amendment video or maybe post it in the description or something like that. But just to kind of recap it, I would say that for summoners and totem builds, hybrid is absolutely great because you're not getting hit often and you really just need that huge pool so that when you do get hit, you can survive the hit and then you're back to, defensively going behind your totems and stuff like that, especially if you're playing a build where your totems have taunt, it's even better. So hybrid absolutely great in those situations, or in summoner we have tons of minions out. I don't really routinely play summoner, but I see summoners all the time that are hybrid, so I figure it must be pretty good. In terms of leeching builds though, however, which are a lot of the fast clear speed builds now in this game, it's not really worth it, I would say, to go hybrid, because you can only leech to one life source at a time, and it pretty much has to be ES. Otherwise, your ES isn't getting useful unless you do something kind of weird like go occultist. You can go occultist and have like Vile Bastion, and then you're gaining you can leech to your life, and then Vile Bastion is essentially recharging your ES. But then you have to go occultist, and so many builds don't really want to go occultist. I would say especially the builds that are like attack and spellcasting builds that revolve around leech. You don't really want to go occultist. That's mostly for like chaos builds, I would say, or stuff like that, stuff like Essence Strain, I think. So you don't want to give up like your whole damage ascendancy just to make your hybrid function well, right? Especially given the fact that in most cases you could build your spellcasting build or your attack-based build as CI, and then you have all of one type of health source. So all your leeching is going to be effective 100% of the time. And then on top of that, you're immune to chaos damage. So you're taking an elemental type completely off the, or not an elemental type, but a damage type completely off the board. And in addition to that, you probably have either just as much or even higher effective health anyways by going pure CI. So there's pretty much no reason why you'd want to go hybrid over CI ever. And so hybrid is pretty much reserved to when you have to do the build as life, but you're just trying to tack on as much extra HP as you can, I guess you would say, or as much extra effective health as you can. And in a lot of cases, if it's a leech build, it just ends up kind of clunky. It's certainly playable, especially if you have a lot of chaos res. That would be the one caveat to what I'm saying here. If you have a ton of chaos res, especially if you're using a ton of chaos res with an Azirius Promise, and you can have a reasonably good uptime on it, then because chaos is built around kind of like going through you and you having a negative resistance to it, the base damages on chaos aren't as high as the base damages on other elemental skills in the game, right? So when you get hit with chaos damage, it's the actual flat damage itself that's coming at you isn't as like huge as maybe a cold or a lightning skill that a mob is casting. And this means when you have very high amounts of chaos res, which the game isn't really balanced around, you can mitigate a lot of this damage, and the build will play a lot cleaner, especially in those shield breaches, because you're not getting chunked out as hard in your life. But other than that, and I'd say in most cases where you can't stack a ton of chaos res, hybrid attack-based or casting-based leech builds are just very, very sketchy, and I would avoid them and just build them pure CI or pure life or life with mind over matter. So that's pretty much my thoughts. And if you like the video, feel free to subscribe or comment. And hope to see you guys next time. Thanks.